All right, good morning, everyone. How are y'all doing? Excellent. We'll get started here in just a second. Okay, before we get started, would you mind leading us in a quick prayer?
Change our lives to be more like you, reach the world. We thank you for the many blessings you provide. Most of all, we thank you for your Son who takes away our sins, and it's because of him that we can come before you now. In Jesus' name.
Amen. Thank you. All right, so in case you were wondering, no, I'm not Brother Holland. He is traveling, and so he has asked me to fill in. If you were expecting Deuteronomy, it is a great class. However, that's not what I'm doing today. We're going to be having a class this winter quarter, Sunday evenings for the high school. And I'm going to be doing a series of lessons based on a book that I'm going to show you in a moment. But I want to start out with a couple of verses. Can someone turn to 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 2? 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 2.
Preach the word, be ready in season and out of season. Reprove, rebuke, and exhort with complete patience and peace.
Okay, so be ready in season and out of season, to correct, rebuke, and exhort with great patience and instruction. To who? I'm sorry? Christians? Everybody, yes. Well, that raises a point right there, doesn't it? Christians, everybody, we have to be ready for discussing with anyone, okay? And that's very critical for us to understand, and it's so easy for us to miss. So this series of lessons that we're going to be doing is primarily around the existence of God, right? So this is starting at the very basics, okay? Can someone else read for us Romans chapter 1, verse 20? Romans chapter 1, verse 20. Okay, I'm sorry, was that Romans 1, verse 20? Okay. I was like, I have different versions, don't get me wrong, but...
For it says, the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse.
Thank you. And specifically in there, I want to focus on his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly perceived. Okay. I want to latch on to that for a minute. So if it is clearly perceived, and it talks about being understood by what has been made, it means that there is evidence of God. We understand that we are supposed to live by faith, but it's not blind faith, okay? So the book that we're going to be using is this. It's Reflections on the Existence of God. It is a series of essays. Richard E. Simmons, you probably have heard of him. Maybe you've read some books of his. And that's what this is. It is thoughts on the existence of God and thinking about it. Too often, either we have not thought about our justifications, our thought process, things like that, or maybe we never have. So a couple of things on this book. One, it is an apologetics series of essays on Christianity versus atheism. It was written in 2019, not too long ago. It does offer several pathways of evidence for the existence of God. So it doesn't just take one track, which I really like. It talks about different concepts that we'll go through in just a second. It does primarily address atheism but to a lesser extent, you could argue it covers agnosticism as well. And then it does cover Christianity versus world religions, but that's fairly short. That's not the main focus, okay? So again, this is very basics. It's covering atheism, which is the belief that there is no God, versus the belief that there is a God. Now, he makes the case for Christianity as well, obviously, but that's not as much the focus. So, a couple of caveats here. First of all, I'm not aware of Richard's specific beliefs. I'm not sure if anyone knows what his affiliation is, anything like that. Anyone? Okay, so just be aware of that. I did not see anything in the book that caught my eye that was a problem. But obviously, this book is not inspired. I think we all know that, but we need to keep that in mind whenever we're looking at a book like this, okay? So, again, we're going to be using this for the Sunday evening class for the teens. These are the chapters, which is also the themes, and within each chapter, there's actually 4 or 5 different essays that are written there. So you can see the kind of the overall theme, but for this morning, I'm only teaching one class on this, so I'm going to focus on the moral argument because I thought it was enlightening to me. I hadn't thought all the way through the problems of atheism and morality. It's much more extensive than I thought. So, if you've been in a class with me before, please understand that this is a discussion class. This is not a lecture. You know what that means. You have to give your own opinions. You have to give advice. You have to correct me. You have to ask questions, anything, okay? Okay, so to start off with, what is the moral argument? This is my phrasing. There's other versions of it. But without God, there is no objective foundation to morality. Okay? So, what's your thoughts on this? This is not directly from the Bible. This quote is not directly from the Bible. So let's talk about it. Do you agree? Okay. I think one of the key words here that we need to understand is objective. Okay. So there's a dog up here. Is this dog cute? Yes. Okay, good. So is that a subjective or objective opinion? Subjective, very good, okay? Does it matter how many people think he's cute? No. Okay, what if something went horribly wrong and someone was a cat person and thought cats were cuter than this dog, right? Still subjective, right? That's important to keep in mind when we talk about objective morality, right? It doesn't matter how many people are on the side of something, it's still subjective if there isn't a measurable, fixed foundation for it. Okay, so in the terms of the moral argument, if God exists, then he sets the rules. If God does not exist, then no one is setting the rules, other than you could argue nature, chemicals, DNA. That's a pretty big problem, isn't it? Okay, before we get too far, though, I'm not sure if you've heard this argument kind of phrased incorrectly. Does this mean that if someone is an atheist, that they are inherently amoral? No. Have you ever met an atheist who was a good person? Yes. Okay. So that is not the discussion of, good versus bad, because we're about to get to that. Now, you'll notice very quickly here, I want to point out, I've got quotes here on good and bad. This is in the world's view of good versus bad, right? So, for Christians, what would the world view a good Christian as being? Okay, so endeavors to follow God, right? So if we're doing the right things, then we should be a good person in the view of the world. For most people, there's actually a problem with that, right? When it gets to what the world beliefs are. The bad is we know right from wrong, but we choose to do wrong. So there are Christians, there are people who believe in God who choose not to follow him, okay? That's not atheist, but they can go wrong. Where it gets weird is on the atheist side. So what is a good person, again, in the eyes of the world, who is atheist? It's someone who follows, and this is kind of my definition, we can debate this, follows the current societal norms. Would you agree with that? To an extent. Okay, I like that. To an extent. It sounds like we're not in 100% agreement. Someone give their opinion. How would you rephrase this? Yes. There's a time element, isn't there? Very good. That's actually in my notes. All right, so anyone else? Okay, well, let's look at what a bad person would be. They follow their own morals, which they justify to themselves. Well, that sounds like, oh, well, you know, they're justifying it to themselves. Obviously, that's bad. Well, on the atheist side, all of them are justifying it to themselves. It's just, hey, the good people are in the majority. Have y'all ever read, like, historical fictions about life in, say, the Middle Ages and things like that? That's a pretty brutal period, right? How did they decide who controlled a piece of land? Was there, like, I'm talking about, like, before 1000 AD even. It's whoever held it, basically, right? Whoever was able to conquer it and hold it, that was theirs until someone else conquered them. Well, that's pretty brutal, isn't it? That's kind of the norm. Back then, someone who came in and conquered a whole place and he ran it pretty well. Well, he's good. That's true. And we're actually going to come, that's going to be later, actually near the end, but you're absolutely right. One of the things we need to keep in mind is that, we have to do what God says in order to be a Christian, not just believe, okay? Okay, so with this concept that good is following what current societal norms are, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Have some Christians who follow their own morals, which is fine.
Yes. Where does that put them on this block? I would argue that puts them here, but we need to rephrase the wording. Yeah. I'm sorry, y'all probably didn't hear her very well. There are some Christians, people who believe in Christ, but they follow their own morals. They choose what to do. So are they following what God said? Now, keep in mind, my phrasing was there pretty specific. It wasn't we follow God. It's we endeavor, right? We also have to keep in mind we're all sinners, we all fail. But we're at least working to, right? Okay, so with this concept, though, of follows current societal norms as being, in the world's view, good, what can go horribly, horribly wrong with this? So, this is from Richard Dawkins. He's an evolutionary biologist. And by the way, there's a lot of good quotes in this book. That's one of the reasons I like it. It's a lot of discussion points. So he said, in a universe of blind physical forces and genetic replication, some people are going to get hurt, other people are going to get lucky, and you won't find any rhyme or reason to it, nor any justice. The universe we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is at bottom no design, no purpose, no evil, and no good. Nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. DNA neither knows nor cares. DNA just is, and we dance to its music. Wow, what a depressing worldview. As bad as it sounds on the surface, it gets worse. Okay, so if we are nothing but chemicals, DNA, okay, what implications does that have? We have no control over anything in our life. All right, let's think through this. There's no moral basis. If we're just chemicals, it's just neurons randomly firing. It's what we've seen, right? At that point, again, it's kind of critical that you understand he's an evolutionary biologist, right? So what does that mean for us?
Deciding anything has no free will to do anything. But if that's the case, then what he's saying is using free will to make that statement.
Yes. I'm sorry, if you didn't hear, if you make this case that it's just chemicals, then we do not have free will. It's our DNA made us do it effectively. But to make that argument, you use free will. Yes.
At least two flaws with this, just on the surface.
Only two? No, I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
Just on the surface of logic. One is DNA just is, so that violates the law of cause and effect.
Yes.
The second thing is he uses the word justice. Everything else he said would make that word meaningless.
Yes.
You can't use that word without some objective standard.
Yes. And again, this book has a lot of good anecdotes and quotes, and there's one specifically on that at the end. Okay, so if we all dance to the music, how does this affect crime and punishment? Which is a good book, by the way. So it makes it arbitrary. Why is it arbitrary? Nobody can help it. Their DNA made them do it. Maybe society failed them, right? Because maybe society is kind of supposed to be guardrails and push them one way or the other. Crime and punishment. Other thoughts on this if this is the worldview? Yeah, go ahead.
Just didn't get lucky.
Yeah. Whoever they hurt, they weren't lucky that day.
Well, isn't this really the difference between animals and people?
Yes.
I mean, if you look at
Yes.
if the baby gets eaten because it's the slowest.
Right.
Now, if we had a baby die, it would be awful. Like,
Right.
it would be travesty. I mean, and that's, maybe there is, among animals, but among people, that's where we're different, right? And that's the way God made us is different to rule over the dominion of animals.
That is exactly correct. All right, so I'm going to read a quote out of this. Eventually. Here we go. Okay. So this was between Richard Dawkins, the guy who said this, and radio talk show host I'd never heard of. The host asked, when you make a value judgment, don't you immediately step outside of this evolutionary process and say that the reason this is good is that it's good? And you don't have any way to stand on that statement. And Dawkins, he says, my value judgment itself would come from my evolutionary past. So therefore, it's just as random in a sense, this is the host again, excuse me, it's just as random in a sense as any product of evolution. So Dawkins says, you could say that. Nothing about it makes it more probable that there is anything supernatural. So the host says, ultimately, then, as an example, your belief that rape is wrong is as arbitrary as the fact that we've evolved to have 5 fingers other than 6. His answer, you could say that, yeah. Wow. He is standing by his worldview, but wow. And it gets worse than this. Okay. So what's your thoughts on that? Let's pause there for a second. Yes?
When he's saying that we are just DNA, he's taken the soul out of this.
Yes.
So there's no consequences to anything. In his view, when you die, that's it. You're done.
Yes. And that's getting closer and closer to how bad this gets. Okay, so let me read something here real quick. Yeah, okay, so let me back up a little bit. This is a debate between Dennis Prager, who you probably have heard of, and an atheist philosopher named Jonathan Glover. So Glover had been speaking about the horrors of religion. Now, this goes back to what you had said. Just because someone claims to be a Christian, believes in Christ even, does not make them a follower of Christ, right? So when he brought up the horrors of religion, is he correct? Well, kind of. There have been many, many things done in the name of Christ that are horrible, right? Does that make them Christian things? No. Okay, but Prager then asked this. He said, if you were stranded in the middle of the night in a desolate Los Angeles street, and if, as you stepped out of your car with fear and trembling, you were suddenly to hear the weight of pounding footsteps behind you, and you saw 10 burly young men who had just stepped out of the dwelling coming towards you, would it make a difference or not to know that they were coming from a Bible study? Yeah. So, in other words, he knows, this wasn't Dawkins in this case, but they know that, okay, if you are Christian, if you're truly trying to follow Christ, it generally, if you are successful, is guiding you towards being a better person, a moral person, right? I shouldn't have said better, I don't like that term, but a moral person. Okay, so let's go to this. All right, so where does this path lead us? And this is where it really dawned on me how bad this gets. Okay, what is Darwinism? It's the survival of the fittest, okay? And by the way, the book does cover evolution in a different chapter. It's really good. I really liked it, but we don't have time to cover that today. So let's just say, okay, if you start with Darwinism, so survival of the fittest, what does that mean? It literally means survival, right? There are two of something, and whichever one is able to survive, then he wins. That may mean killing the other one, maybe it just means surviving whatever the atmosphere is like, whatever. It means that they survive and they keep going. Okay, we usually think about, yeah, you got two amoeba and one's different from the other. We don't really see a big deal about that. Okay, then you get to Friedrich Nietzsche, who declared, he was a German philosopher, declared God is dead. Okay? So if you have evolutionary biology, survival of the fittest, you have no belief in God whatsoever, so that goes back to your point that there is no afterlife, there is no consequence of any kind. We go back to what you were talking about where you don't really have control, it's just DNA. Why does this apply to only amoeba? This applies to humans. Oh no. All of a sudden, you get into what Hitler was doing. I hate to use him as an example because everybody always jumps to him as an example. But all of a sudden, what is the argument, without using God, against him and against what he was doing? Because if it's survival of the fittest, well, apparently, well, he wasn't, he lost, but apparently in his mind, he was the fittest. That raises so many horrible things. So what would non-Christians say? Oh, wait a minute, you're going too far now because what? Can you think of anything? What would their basis be? I'm sorry? That they're evil. Right, they're evil. Obviously, he's evil. Yes, we agree. What's evil? Yeah, actually, by the way, that was the first or second, I think it was the second chapter of the book was what is evil, basically the absence of good. But yes, it would be, it's evil. Okay, well, evil doesn't exist if it's not a thing if there is no God. Okay. I would say that, maybe they argue, well, yeah, but he hurt others. He hurt other humans. Well, that's not okay. Bears hurt other humans, and, well, we let them go. So what is the argument? Yeah, it becomes a problem, doesn't it? Sorry.
I said there would be no argument.
Yeah, there would be no argument. Exactly. Okay, so let's go. I am cheating a little bit here. I'm going to go to an earlier chapter. Chapter 24. So, yeah, so used to that. All right. So, this was a statement given by Hitler in 1941. He said, today, war is, and by the way, today kind of goes to the time element of what is societal norms. Today, war is nothing but a struggle for the riches of nature. By virtue of an inherent law, that's interesting terminology, these riches belong to him who conquers them. That's in accordance with the laws of nature. By means of the struggle, the elites are continually renewed. The law of selection justifies this incessant struggle by allowing the survival of the fittest. Christianity is a rebellion against natural law, a protest against nature. Taken to its logical extreme, Christianity would mean the systematic cultivation of the human failure. Okay, I don't think I can get worse than that, right? That's about as bad as I could get to in this series of logic. Okay, so what is the Christian view then? Hopefully y'all can see that a little bit. So this was a criminologist. He said, I am a Christian not because Jesus' way benefits society, but because I believe it is true. If it is true, it should create the conditions in which human life works best. Okay, so this gets back to the whole concept of what are we talking about this morning? Evidence for the existence of God. Again, we're not trying to mathematically prove God. Okay, that is a different thing. We're not trying to say, okay, you take some weights and you do this and oh, there's God, right? Faith is an element here, but what is evidence? What does the word evidence mean? Sorry? Proof, okay. Yes, the earth itself. And by the way, there's a great chapter in the book on that too. But evidence is physical things that should come about if X happened, right? So, let's say that you've got a policeman and he's investigating a crime and there's a boot print, okay? And it's a size 14 boot. Is that proof, absolutely, that John did it? We don't even know who John is, no. But is it evidence that there was a guy here who had big feet? Yes. Probably tall. Mathematically, statistically, yes, probably so, right? So it's things that build up if you have that boot, and then you happen to find John's coat over there on the side, and okay, those things start building up to make the case that John did it. In this case, it's evidence that there is a God. This alone, this one topic, in my mind, alone does not prove God, but it's evidence towards God. Okay, so let's think about this. If God exists and God, excuse me, I have this worded funny here on my notes. If God exists and is the God of love and order, then following his instructions should lead to love and order. Do we agree? Do they? That's actually an easy question. Yeah, in the grand scheme of things. Okay, so if you have a society that is made up of all Christians, is it all love and order? No. Well, why? Exactly. Unfortunately, we have the human element, right? We fail. But those failures, I don't have it up there anymore, but those failures go against what God instructed us to do, right? So if we, cheat someone on a business deal, I'm a Christian, they're a Christian, we reach an agreement, we're in church together every Sunday, great, and then I cheat him out of a business deal. Is that a failure of Christianity? It's a failure of the individual. I failed, right? So that's important to keep in mind is that if you follow God's word, it leads to love, it leads to peace, it leads to harmony. The fact that we don't have those things perfectly is because of not just our failures, but all humans' failures, the failure to follow God. Matt, you got something, I know. All right, go ahead.
I didn't raise my hand, but I can pontificate on it.
Yeah, go ahead. That's what we're here for. Yes.
Okay. Well, I mean, I like where you're going because it introduces the word true.
Yeah.
You know, Jesus, when he was before Pilate, he said for this reason, because Pilate was saying, "Are you a king?" Mm-hmm. And then he said, "Well, the Jews call you a king." You know, and he said, "For this reason I was born, to testify or bear witness to the truth." Which, like, how does that have anything to do with kingship?
Right.
And then Pilate's response is, "What is truth?" Which is fascinating because it's showing the contrast of what you're saying. Mm-hmm. Those who don't believe in God and therefore don't believe in a standard, and then those who do. And Jesus came to bear witness to the truth.
Yes, exactly. So what Matt's saying is that Jesus came to bear witness to the truth. Pilate asked, what is truth, right? How can there be, how can there be a truth? He was not aware of this, right? So he wanted to be instructed. Okay, let's go to another quote real quick. I've actually got two of them here. Okay, so this, again, is towards discussion of if you follow God's law, then good things come from that, right? All right, so this is a different criminologist. He says, religion is a powerful antidote to crime. It clearly impacts the rates of drug use, violence, and gang activity in the inner city. This is why Eugene Rivers, a pastor in Brooklyn, says, if you want to help underprivileged youth, we have two options. It's either barbed wire and more black juvenile super predators, or civil society and stronger black churches. It's that simple. Now, I don't like some of his phrases there, but I know what he's getting at, right? We basically have two options. We can either quarantine ourselves off, things like that, or you can follow Christ, and all of a sudden, if that is our basis, things start getting better. There's a lot of debate right now in politics around crime. It's so many things, so many different subjects within politics, that if you ask what is the fundamental thing that has changed, that has failed us, and don't get me wrong, there was no time in history that was perfect, I know that, but what has fundamentally changed over the past, say, 60 years that have made society degrade? Wouldn't it be the lack of God? Because without God, so many things start failing. And it doesn't seem like it's direct, right? It's not like, oh, they weren't in church on Sunday, and therefore they were driving, therefore that's why there's more wrecks on the road. No, it's not that direct. But as an example, when you look at the murder rates, the violence rates, things like that, why do people become violent? When you start realizing what their current worldview is, especially when they're young, let's say, 15 to 25, something like that. If they don't have God, what do they have? Chaos. Nothing, right? They don't have a hope. They don't have a hope in a future. And I don't mean just a future on earth. I mean at all. And if that, sorry, go ahead.
Does the author go into the evidence of Satan's part?
I would argue no. No, honestly, I went through this book over about 2 months, so it's possible that I forgot it, but no, I don't believe so. Now, like I said, though, this book is primarily focused on the evidence of God, and it does touch into Christianity and the evidence for Christianity versus world religions, but that's actually a fairly small, I think it was only one chapter if I remember right. It's mainly atheism versus God, yes.
Can you go back to the slide you had before about survival of the fittest?
Mm-hmm.
Children are learning survival of the fittest as they grow up. What does it matter? I'm surviving the fittest.
Exactly.
When Christian children learn, oh, Genesis is wrong, well then, how do I know that Matthew's not right? I mean,
Yeah.
If it's wrong at the beginning,
Not you.
you.
Yeah, exactly. I'm sorry if y'all didn't hear that. I'm trying to repeat what people are saying. So if you believe in survival of the fittest, you're taught that from an early age. Those are basically the two options, aren't there? Either a young child is taught survival of the fittest, or they're taught God. If they're taught survival of the fittest, and they don't have, they're living in terrible conditions, things like that, they have no hope in a distant future. They don't have a whole lot of hope in a near-term future. What does it matter? Get whatever you can get. What does that lead to? Crime. Lots and lots of crime. And desperation, yes. Okay, so I want to read another anecdote real quick. I don't know why, but this specific type of anecdote I really like. So there was a philosophy teacher, and actually this isn't like made up. He actually did this to a student, which is awesome. That's why I won't ever be allowed to be a professor. So a student wrote a research paper arguing that there is no God, and consequently, he went on to argue, there can be no objective or absolute moral principles. Judged by the paper's research, scholarship, and argumentation, most would have agreed that it was easily an A paper. The professor, however, wrote these words on the paper. F. I do not like this blue folder. The student stormed into the professor's office, waving the paper, protesting, that's not fair. This is totally unjust. Why should I be graded on the color of the folder? I should have been graded on its contents, not its color. Once the student had settled down, the professor asked quietly, was this the paper which argued that on the basis of a godless universe in which we live, there are no objective moral principles such as fairness and justice? Did you not also argue that everything is a matter of one's subjective likes and dislikes? All right, he already knows the problem here. He says, yes, yes. Says, well then, I do not like this blue folder. The grade will remain an F. Abruptly, the face of the young man changed. It struck him that he really did believe in objective moral principles, such as fairness and justice. As the professor changed the grade to an A, the student left with a new understanding of the objective nature of morality. It is easy to proclaim that there is no God, but it is impossible to live consistently and honestly within the resulting atheistic framework. Most, I'm going to get these terms wrong, non-sociopathic, I think it is, people would agree on certain things are moral, are good. That alone, it's embedded within us. We know fairness, right? Most people, there are exceptions to this. We know those things. Why? Because God made us this way. So if there is a God, and that God is the God of the Bible, who teaches love, who teaches peace, who teaches us to do certain things, and doing those certain things leads us to exactly what he said they would lead us to, that is evidence towards the existence of God. Okay, so we are almost out of time, but we've got a few minutes. Questions, comments? Go ahead.
Romans chapter 2, around verse 16, talk about how more clothes are like Gentiles. It said, even though they didn't have the law of God, they did by nature the things that were in it, because God designed us to be that way.
Yes.
So they knew the difference between right and wrong in some instances, that it was wrong to murder or kill or do things. It was within you because God designed us that way.
Very good. Excellent. Anyone else? Questions, comments, thoughts? Yep.
For the wrath of God is reviled from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth and unrighteousness. Because what may be known of God is manifest in them, for God has shown it to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. And I'll skip down a few verses. Professing to be wise, they became fools, and changed the glory of the incorruptible God into an image. The New Testament church faced the same thing we're facing today.
Yes.
I mean, if you read the first two chapters in Romans, it clearly goes through the atheism or idolatry, whatever you want to call it, whatever name we want to associate to it, versus Christianity. It's there. To the fact that Paul wrote a whole letter to Rome regarding it.
And on that point, I would like to say that studying this and thinking about this can be a little depressing when you start realizing what fairly large segments of the population believe. I'm going to take that as an optimistic thing, though. I have the habit of looking at the news, of looking at current events and thinking, wow, we are getting bad so fast, right? We're in a downward trajectory. It really seems like that. We cannot possibly have been on this downward trajectory since Adam and Eve, right? It's not possible. In other words, there has been no society that was perfect, right? That was all good. There have always been problems. Even today's problems, they're different. They seem worse to me, but they're different. But we all, as Christians, throughout time, have had to struggle with societal issues like that. Other comments, questions? Yes?
I think from Adam and Eve and on, it's not so much a downhill slide, but it's waves of low spots and high spots.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think, I'll say this comment and I'll probably get lynched, but as Christians, we're lazy. And we have the responsibility to go out and bring us back into that peak instead of sitting here complaining about, not necessarily right now this morning, but complaining about, you know, how bad society is. It's our responsibility to fix
change it.
society.
Yes, exactly.
And the only way to do that is through Christ.
Yes, exactly. The only way to stop that downhill pattern is through Christ, to stop the entropy. There was something in there that I wanted to mention. What was that? Sorry, it slipped my mind. I did skip over, by the way, some introductory chapters here. If you're interested in that book, then come see me. I'll let you take a picture of it or something, or let you borrow it. But some of the introductory things were very good to start you down this path of thinking. And I don't remember what it was now. One of the things was he encourages us not to be intellectually lazy, right? It's so easy to become creatures of habit. We come in, we worship, we go home. Maybe we do things correctly even most of the time. But have we really thought through it so that, going back to the first verse we read, we are prepared in season and out of season? We need to have thought these things through so that if we do encounter someone who says, there is no God, I hate to say it, but our first response should not be to pick up the Bible and flip to a certain page and say, nope, see, here it is. They don't believe in the Bible. We have to start where they are. And in order to start where they are, we have to think these things through. We can't just skip over that part. Yes?
One of my favorite lines, and I don't know whose it is, but where you see design, you can be assured there is a designer.
Yes. So if you didn't hear that, where you see design, you can be assured there is a designer. There's a whole section in here on evolution, and it's really eye-opening too. Maybe I should have taught that instead, but it's really good. It talks about exactly that. And we know a lot of those things, right? We know that there is a designer. Yes?
I was just going to say, one of the things is, to say there is no absolute truth is in and of itself an absolute truth, and contradicts itself right away.
Yes, there's a lot of contradictions in that thought process. Okay, I'm sorry, we are out of time, so I'm going to lead us in a prayer. Our Father in heaven, we thank you for this time that you've given to us to come and to study your word and to think about you. Lord, as we move on into the worship service, we pray that we do all things according to your word.